In a world racing toward noise and distraction, the quiet life of Saint Carlo Acutis began without spectacle. Yet something unseen followed his steps, as if time itself paused briefly, watching a future story take its first, almost unnoticeable breath. Born into ordinary days and modern streets, he moved through childhood with a calm attentiveness, noticing details others passed without thought, sensing that meaning often hides beneath routine moments, quietly shaping hearts before anyone realizes something has already begun to change. Even as technology filled rooms with light and motion, his inner focus remained strangely steady, drawn not by novelty, but by something deeper, something that seemed to call from silence, asking to be listened to rather than explained or displayed. Those around him noticed an unusual consistency, a rhythm between faith and daily life that felt unforced, as if devotion was not an obligation but a natural response, quietly growing stronger each time it was practiced without applause. There were no dramatic signs, no public moments demanding attention, only a steady interior clarity forming beneath youthful simplicity, hinting that something significant does not always announce itself loudly before it begins to reshape unseen paths ahead. As the years unfolded, Saint Carlo Acutis became known not for extraordinary acts but for an uncommon depth, a spiritual gravity that seemed to pull moments inward, making ordinary days feel charged with purpose, even when nothing visibly unusual occurred. Friends described a presence that brought stillness rather than excitement, a calm that subtly unsettled assumptions, leaving behind a question that lingered longer than words. Why did such quiet conviction feel stronger than noise-filled certainty? His days followed simple patterns, yet beneath them ran a current of intentional focus, as though each choice was quietly aligned with something unseen, preparing ground for events that had not yet revealed their weight or consequence. No one spoke of miracles then, because nothing outward demanded that word, yet a subtle tension grew, the kind that forms when an ordinary life begins leaning toward a moment it cannot yet recognize, but will one day be defined by. Health, time, and youth still appeared intact, but an unspoken fragility hovered nearby, almost imperceptible, suggesting that the path ahead might soon narrow, forcing unseen questions to move closer, step by measured step. What seemed like preparation without explanation slowly gathered momentum, turning silence into anticipation, as if life itself was inhaling, holding breath before releasing events that would shift meaning far beyond what anyone expected. By the time the first unseen threshold approached, Saint Carlo Acutis stood quietly at its edge, unaware of how deeply his life had already been positioned to echo far beyond youth, time, and the limits everyone assumed were fixed. When the rhythm of ordinary days suddenly faltered, Saint Carlo Acutis did not meet the change with panic, but with a composed stillness, as if he sensed that this unexpected interruption carried meaning far heavier than its first symptoms suggested. The body began whispering warnings before the mind could name them, small signals easily dismissed, yet they lingered with persistence, creating a subtle unease that refused to fade, pressing quietly against the edges of what felt normal. Doctors spoke in measured tones, while time itself seemed to tighten, compressing days into moments that felt unusually dense, as though each hour now carried more weight, more consequence than the ones that came before it. The certainty of youth fractured quickly, replaced by an unfamiliar urgency, where plans dissolved and attention narrowed, pulling focus toward the present moment, forcing life to be lived without the comfort of distant assumptions. Pain did not dominate at first, but awareness did, a heightened sensitivity to time, words, and presence, as if everything unimportant was quietly stripped away, leaving only what truly mattered, standing exposed. As the diagnosis became clear, Saint Carlo Acutis accepted its gravity without collapse, meeting uncertainty with a steady interior resolve that transformed fear into focus, and focus into a calm readiness few around him expected to witness. Hospital rooms replaced familiar spaces, yet the atmosphere did not feel empty, only concentrated, as if silence itself leaned closer, listening, waiting, watching how a young life would respond when the future suddenly shortened. Those nearby sensed a shift, not toward despair, but toward an unusual clarity, where suffering sharpened intention instead of breaking it, turning each interaction into something deliberate, meaningful, and strangely luminous. Time no longer stretched forward comfortably. It hovered unstable, creating tension between what remained unsaid and what urgently needed to be expressed before opportunity quietly slipped away. Even as strength diminished, presence intensified, drawing others inward, making moments feel suspended, as if the room itself understood that something irreversible was approaching, yet had not fully crossed the threshold. The illness advanced with quiet precision, and with it grew a sense that the story was accelerating, pulling unseen threads tighter, preparing for a moment that would not end significance, but release it. As the final horizon drew nearer, Saint Carlo Acutis remained remarkably composed, standing at the edge of life with a stillness that suggested this closing moment was not a conclusion, but a passage already unfolding. After the stillness of loss settled, the name Saint Carlo Acutis did not fade into memory as expected, but began surfacing quietly in prayers, whispered with urgency, as if his presence had shifted rather than disappeared, waiting for attention. Far from the place of mourning, an unrelated life carried an unseen struggle, one marked by medical limits and unanswered questions, where hope had narrowed to routine persistence, unaware that another story was already leaning toward it. Doctors documented what they could measure, yet an unresolved gap remained, a space where statistics stopped offering reassurance, leaving families suspended between expectation and quiet resignation that nothing further could realistically change. It was within that fragile interval that a suggestion surfaced, not dramatic or authoritative, but gentle, proposing a prayer directed with intention towards someone recently gone, whose name carried unexpected calm. The prayer began without spectacle.
Saint Carlo Acutis,
Almost
pray for
cautiously.
healing.
Yet something shifted in the atmosphere, a subtle internal adjustment that felt less like hope returning and more like attention being drawn elsewhere. As the name Saint Carlo Acutis was spoken, the moment tightened, focus sharpening inward as if the act itself aligned unseen threads, creating a quiet expectancy that felt different from desperation, steadier, more deliberate. No immediate change followed, yet hours carried an unfamiliar lightness, symptoms hesitating where they had previously advanced without pause, prompting cautious glances and restrained curiosity among those watching closely. Medical notes recorded stabilization where decline had been expected, a pause that disrupted assumptions, forcing professionals to reconsider trajectories they believed were already fixed and irreversible. Family members struggled to name what they felt, torn between relief and disbelief, sensing that something had intervened without force, quietly redirecting a course that moments earlier seemed sealed. Time pressed forward again, but not as before, carrying with it an undercurrent of anticipation, where each small change felt charged, suggesting that this interruption might be more than coincidence. The situation demanded verification, patience, and distance. Yet the initial shift remained undeniable, marking the first quiet fracture in certainty, where explanations would soon be required to follow what had already occurred. By the time attention turned fully toward understanding the change, the name Saint Carlo Acutis stood firmly within the unfolding account, no longer as memory, but as a presence linked to what could not be ignored. As attention intensified, the case linked to Saint Carlo Acutis entered a stricter phase, where emotion stepped aside and documentation took command, transforming whispered belief into a process governed by records, measurements, and an expectation that anomalies must justify themselves. Medical files were reopened and timelines reconstructed, each symptom re-examined against its previous trajectory, revealing gaps where decline should have continued, yet instead reversed with a decisiveness that unsettled established clinical expectations. Independent specialists were consulted, their distance intended to eliminate bias, yet their conclusions converged, noting that recovery occurred without corresponding treatment adjustments, a deviation that resisted conventional explanatory frameworks. Tests repeated what numbers already suggested: stability hardening into improvement, improvement edging toward normal function. each result tightening the narrative, leaving less room for coincidence and more pressure on explanation. Skepticism did not vanish, but it adapted, shifting from dismissal to scrutiny, probing for hidden variables, delayed reactions or overlooked factors, only to find the same barrier repeatedly standing in the way. When the name Saint Carlo Acutis resurfaced within official discussion, it did so cautiously, framed not as conclusion but as reference. A point of convergence between timing, prayer, and an outcome medicine could not initiate. Reports emphasized chronology, highlighting the precise moment intervention shifted, correlating improvement with a specific act rather than gradual progression, a detail that resisted dilution through broader statistical trends. Each review narrowed interpretation, compressing alternatives until the remaining explanation stood isolated, unsupported by precedent, yet consistent across every layer of evidence brought forward for examination. What unsettled reviewers most was not the recovery itself, but its resistance to categorization, refusing to align with known spontaneous remission patterns or delayed therapeutic effects documented elsewhere. Language within documents became careful and restrained, avoiding excess while acknowledging limitation, signaling that medicine had reached its explanatory edge and could proceed no further without speculation. Consensus formed gradually, not through persuasion but elimination, as every alternative explanation fell away, leaving an absence where certainty usually stands, demanding recognition rather than belief. By the conclusion of review, the case bearing the quiet mark of Saint Carlo Acutis stood validated in record, no longer anecdote, but an event officially acknowledged as exceeding the reach of medical causation. When confirmation settled into record, the story associated with Saint Carlo Acutis did not conclude. It expanded, moving outward through conversations, testimonies, and quiet reflections, as if the verified moment had unlocked a wider corridor of meaning. What followed was not spectacle, but diffusion, the gradual spread of attention across borders, languages, and generations, where individuals encountered the account independently, each sensing a personal question forming beneath the facts. Communities absorbed the details carefully, noting the restraint of language, the precision of documentation, and the absence of exaggeration, which paradoxically amplified impact by leaving space for reflection rather than instruction. Instead of answers being imposed, an invitation emerged, subtle yet persistent, encouraging listeners to reconsider assumptions about presence, absence, and how influence might operate beyond visible boundaries of time. The verified event began functioning less as an endpoint and more as a lens, reframing ordinary struggles, causing some to pause mid-routine, sensing that intervention might arrive quietly, without announcement or dramatic force. As the name Saint Carlo Acutis continued circulating, it gathered resonance rather than novelty, evoking steadiness instead of shock, and suggesting that endurance, not intensity, defines the reach of such a life. Skeptics and believers alike found themselves aligned by evidence, confronted with the same documentation, compelled to engage not with speculation, but with the implications of an occurrence that resisted dismissal. Questions multiplied, not about what happened, but about what follows, how recognition alters responsibility, and whether attention itself becomes a form of participation in something still unfolding. Across distances, the account settled into quiet persistence, revisited during illness, uncertainty, or loss, offering neither guarantee nor escape, but a steady point against which fear could be measured. Its strength lay in limitation, in the refusal to claim more than what was documented, allowing the absence of excess to carry weight, and letting silence complete what words could not. What endured was a recalibration of expectation, a subtle adjustment in how possibility was imagined, where hope no longer demanded spectacle, only attentiveness to moments easily overlooked. By the time the echo settled, Saint Carlo Acutis remained present not through noise, but through consequence, a life whose verified impact continued shaping perception long after the moment itself had passed. Saint Carlo Acutis, today we turn to you with open hearts. Touch those watching this video right now, those carrying silent fears, unanswered prayers, or fading hope. Intercede for healing, clarity, and courage and remind us that God works even when the path feels quiet. If this prayer reached you, write Amen and join us in faith.